following the strike of pop crew in 2002 and the disaffection of members of the trade union, what steps has the department taken to boost the morale of the staff in this regard? Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. Firstly, I said in a previous question, I spoke to all the personnel from head office, about 2,000, and to uplift the morale, I said to them that each and every one of us must play the role. And I've referred to say, let's get rid of the bad apples, because it's those bad apples that also affects the good apples that are hardworking people with integrity. And it starts with consequence management. I also said that they can come forward with problems, and referring, for instance, to Pop Crew. I am going to meet with them one of these days to see how we can ensure that our people are protected against discrimination. Although we must also say this to each other, the declaration of intent when it comes to the government of national unity, it is quite clear that we say that when we appoint people, it must be on merit, based on experience, based on, for instance, qualifications, and we must ensure that we get the best person in that position. That's part of the declaration of intent, and that's what I'm going to do in the department that already started doing. Thank you.
Thank you. The third supplementary question will be asked by the Honourable Klopper.
Thank you, Honourable Minister. Pertaining to the Civil Rights March in 2022, and considering wages are at best average for correctional service facility officials, considering the circumstances in which they work, will increases in danger pay specifically be implemented in the remuneration structures for correctional service officials, considering the dangerous and daunting circumstances that they work under, or will these concerns go unaddressed? Thank you, Honourable.
The Honourable the Minister.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's fair to say that we must look into that specific matter when it comes to endangered situations or danger situations. And what I think, and what I already asked, for instance, is that I want the statistics on all the employees who are, for instance, in a specific position for the last 10 years, 10 to 20 years, 20 to 30 years, and I want to see whether there was increases in their salary, what type of increases, were they also promoted to higher categories or not? Because I think you cannot have a person, say for 20 to 30 years in a specific position, and there are only very small, can I say, increases in payment. We will have to look into that, and that's why I said we're going to meet with Pop Crew as well to see how we can ensure that specific our wardens who are actually in a dangerous position. We had a couple of cases where they were attacked by inmates with sharp objects, and we will have to make a differentiation. But I will follow that process quite deep.
The last supplementary question will be asked by the Honourable Diale.
Thank you, Chair. Minister, the Pop Crew march to the Union Building in 2022 entailed more than just the narrow-colored nationalism that the PA seeks to portray. The march sought to address some key operational and policy shortcomings at SAPS, including the need for tackling rampant overcrowding, gangsterism, and corruption in our correctional service facilities that had made it difficult for officials to maintain law and order. What we need to know, Minister, is since assuming office, what step have you undertaken to specifically deal with gangsterism and at correctional facilities, which is making it harder to maintain order at these facilities? Thank you.
Thank you. The Honourable the Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. Part of maintaining order is, as I said, there must be consequence management. And I see consequence management as part of the situation where there are contraventions of certain rules and there are personnel involved with that who are complicit, then to ensure better order, then there must be actions and consequences for those personnel. The problem is impunity. And actually, impunity is the problem of whole of South Africa, where our criminal justice system is at stake. So I strongly believe the moment you have good, fair, and just consequence management, you will improve the situation and have better order. I thank you.
Get it from the Minister of Correctional Services, Dr. Pieter Groenewald, on, the importance of consequence management. What he calls consequence management is the fact that, people who have done wrongs in South Africa have to face consequences for their crime. And actually in a video, he speaks about how the problem in South Africa is actually impunity. And impunity is actually, if I check a quick definition on Webster's dictionary, impunity is actually the exemption from punishment or freedom from injurious consequences of an action. So in other words, Dr. Pieter Groenewald actually argues that, one of the problems facing South Africa's crime issue, especially the large crime rate that South Africa actually has now, to the point where it's been called, or it's getting close to being called, the murder capital of the world, with Cape Town being regarded as, or KwaZulu-Natal actually being regarded as the murder capital of South Africa. He argues that the biggest problem that's actually increasing or reproducing that problem is actually impunity. So if you understand what Dr. Groenewald is actually talking about here, it actually speaks about how, impunity, which is, this definition I just read now, that it's the absence of the consequences of an action. So I remember when I listened to, I showed in my previous video this Mozambican foreigner when he spoke about how, crime. He tried to compare crime in South Africa and crime in Mozambique. There are some things you do not do in Mozambique because the consequences would be brutal. But in South Africa, it appears that, a lot of the people who get into prisons or probably people who commit crime anyway, they have softer jail sentences, or probably even able to be released on bail. And so as a result, the consequence for the crimes that have been committed, or consequence for wrongdoings in South African society, doesn't seem to be met in a suitable way as equated to the crime which has been perpetuated. Also, as a result of that absence of consequence management, according to Dr. Pieter Groenewald, crime continuously reproduces, or it produces a system, the system sort of like allows a reproduction of consequences, reproduction of issues that then give birth to more and more crime. And so Dr. Groenewald wants to tackle that from that perspective. That's his theory now in tackling the crime problem in South Africa, being the fact that South Africans, crime system, SAPS, the legal system, has to really get tougher on crime, okay, on addressing consequences of crime. But I know one of the issues I've actually found and discovered, especially in my research in the whole crime and gang related issues in South Africa, especially as regards, there was this really young guy who actually, I think he's been raised in a family where there's been these gang-related issues, and so there was a story where he actually, lured a teenager or so to some quiet location and actually murdered the teenager. I think raped and murdered her and all that, and so. He's now actually been sent to prison. But some other cases like that, actually, I think that it seems that most of the argument Dr. Groenewald argues here is that some of these guys are actually bailable, okay? So some of them, even with the grievous offenses they actually commit, they actually can stay some time in prison and then be bailed. And when they get out, it appears that the system is so soft in meeting consequences for their action. As a result of that, the impunity continues to reproduce itself. And so Dr. Groenewald is trying to really tackle the problem of crime and gang-related issues from that perspective. And I think that's really smart, that's really wise. If you listen to Sylvester Mofokeng's interview on Scheme's YouTube channel, you can see how Mofokeng argues that one of the things that actually drove, growing up, in a crime-ridden society at the time, crime became an art for most of the black youth. And Gaten McKenzie actually speaks about this also, that growing up as a colored youth, the crime was almost like the only option. There was also the option of being pursuing a career and all that, but it appears that crime came really easily because there was absence of mentors, there were absence of role models to look up to, and most of the young people in South Africa, blacks especially, ended up pursuing crime. So Sylvester Mofokeng argues that crime then became an art, okay? So it wasn't just about the thing about committing the crime to survive itself, but then slowly the survival, the crime then became an artistic mode of expression of anger, so to speak. Okay, so no, regardless of how many times he got into prison, he would actually be artistic in his ways of devising ways to escape prison. I think in one occasion, he actually described how he escaped the prison when, in the correctional service, when they were actually in a line to get into a bus. As soon as he got into the bus, because of the other officers who weren't watching, he flew. He actually jumped out of the window and went under the bus for a while and stayed there hooked. And when the bus moved, he actually moved to a point where he actually now left the bus and then came down. That was how he escaped prison. So this crime then became artistic in this regard. And at some point again, he got caught and got into prison, and then and he escaped again. And so the whole thing then became an art because of what Dr. Pieter Groenewald is arguing here, that consequence management is actually really absent in South Africa's correctional system. And so as if there can be an equated, amount of consequence or the weight of the consequence management, if it's actually sufficient enough to meet or to be equated to the crime that has actually been committed by these people, then probably there could be a headway in trying to really now begin this whole effort of correction, because correctional services also goes in hand with psychological realignment, appeasement, mentally, psychologically, and all that. But the consequence in itself has to be heavy so that the prisoner is able to understand the reason why he's actually facing this treatment, and then hopefully end up coming back into society as a reformed person. So that's the whole procedure with this whole impunity and consequence management. And I actually see where Dr. Pieter Groenewald is coming from. But anyway, I really don't know. I know that there's a lot of issues with crime and gang related issues in South Africa. It's shocking. One day I think I spent a whole night watching the documentaries on the gang and the crime, and I think I even saw one comment. One South Africa said he's actually ashamed to be South African with the amount of gang-related crime and issues going on in South Africa. So it's a mess that actually needs a lot of support. I think maybe even the South African police services might not be able to do it alone. They might need other African countries, especially from the level of the force, to help out, because this whole issue with the gang-related crimes and the decadent in South Africa from the perspective of violence might need external support. I know that El Salvador's Nayib Bukele actually did that alone with the military. The defense forces of El Salvador had to join the police to get into because he actually took it as a war. It was actually a war in El Salvador. Now he claims that El Salvador has become the safest country in the Western Hemisphere, leaving behind what it was actually called the murder capital of the world. And probably South Africa might be able to do that in joining South Africa's defense forces with SAPS, especially if there are more leaders like Mkwanazi in KZN in that regard. But also some other African help, some other neighboring countries can actually help out, if this whole goal to stampede gangs and crime, gang-related crime in South Africa is a really, urgent objective. But anyway, I will stop here. I don't know, what do you guys think about this video and Dr. Groenewald's speech here in this video? Share your thoughts in the comments.